All right, well, we're back again after a very short time away. And they did pretty substantial changes to Mage, and I would say they're generally positive. And their note here was that Mage tier bosses were substantially overtuned despite Mage's generally average performance. And this is very true. Spellslinger Frost tier set was 40% DPS, at least going from the talents that used with it. And then for Frostfire SKB, it was like 50% damage increase. So they were definitely super overtuned. So they just hard nerfed all of the tier sets. I didn't rerun the numbers, but they just halved fires. So it's now essentially a third of what it was last week. Um, and they reduced Glacier Spike damage by another 40%. That's pretty massive. For Frost, they just reduced the Pyroblast damage by 50%. The reason they didn't touch the two-piece for Frost is because they can't really nerf this AoE. Frost already had pretty bad AoE. And then for Arcane, they like just heavily reduced the amount of harmony you got, which is good. I mean, some people dislike it because you won't be chain firing intuition barrages, but chain firing intuition when it was a 70% damage amp and you had just insane stacks from harmony all the time just made their prio and AoE go ridiculous. This is a huge splinter buff though. Like that is pretty wild. But they still seem to be doing fine in 5 target. Then they just kind of like gutted the Spellslingers tier set, which is okay. It kind of survived, but probably need to not gut it as much. It's alright. They nerfed the haste for Arcane a little bit. For some reason, they halved it for Fire. They just really massively reduced Sunfury Fire's tier, which seems warranted based on the stuff that comes after. Arcane, they gave it 3% aura. Fire got a 3% aura, a 30% damage increase to Pyroblast, and a 30% damage increase to Flame Strike. So this is massive for Unleash Inferno, because it further amps these abilities. And yeah, that's kind of what they were aiming with here, was they just didn't want to like overpower Unleash Inferno. Of course, this is also good. The Pyroblast damage is just good for SKB, because SKB is also a massive amp on Pyroblast, but in general, it does look like a UI benefit in most from this. And then they buffed all of Frost's damage by 10%. That's okay. Frost mainly needed targeted AoE buffs, but since they nerfed the tier, the 10% essentially counteracted that. So we get started here, I guess. I'm not going to show you the previous numbers, but Frostfire was about 5.82 in single target, and Spellslinger was 5.6. So obviously, Frostfire barely moved, and then Spellslinger jumped up 2.5, 100,000. So that's good. Spellslinger is probably going to just be worse than Frostfire in general in Raid, just because there's so much loss with like Forge Master. Its splinters are going to hit the immune or damage reduction adds, and orbs just commonly, a lot more commonly than you probably think, don't hit a target for the full duration, and that's just a massive loss for Spellslinger. So yeah, this is still a solid place for them to be at. Like this is what Arcane's simming at now. The thing is, take this with a grain of salt, because the Arcane changes will certainly necessitate some updates to their APL for Spellslinger at least. Sunfury is probably just going to stay on there, and this is a very strong place for Sunfury to be, because anytime you add any type of cleave on top of the boss, Arcane automatically just gains like 300k DPS. So yeah, you do not want it in like essentially any situation to ever be out simming Frost or Fire in pure single target. That's just not good. And then for Fire, I don't know if they might have like done some weird things about SKB. I don't know if this is like fully implemented, because this already simmed like this, so it'd be crazy that it would stay the same after all the Pyroblast buffs and everything. But the Glacier Spike nerf would hurt substantially. But Sunfury was at like 4.4 or 5.4 or something, so it shot up to a pretty respectable 5.7. And I don't have AoE for Fire, but and again, stack sims, not the best for comparing viability of specs, right? You look at this, you'll see, oh my god, Frost is such a high number, we're gonna play Frost. It's not true. Frost usually has about this high of a number relative to the other specs. You're probably still not gonna have it as the prog spec, which is fine. I mean, you just want it to be in a strong enough position where you could play it if you wanted to. And I think that's kind of where it's getting at. I still doubt with these numbers that Frost is really going to be the played spec on anything, especially with Sun Fury simming at this high. It's probably going to be what you would play if you did the DH Council fight, for instance, or that one ad fight where all the ads like come in at like 250 or something. Whereas Arcane's going to be like the Forge Master pick, probably, because it has Execute and Cleave with the damage amp in P2. So, anyway, get away from that. And, like Nexus King also would be an Arcane pick because of the ad platforms and the damage amp, which is single target. And the boss takes 99% reduced damage, so you don't want to play Spellslinger there. Anyway. So yeah, here's kind of what all the single target builds did. This is from Ghosto, by the way. He does a lot of the Frost APL changes currently. I don't know if people think I do them. Not me. But yeah. Here, you can see no GS is just about 6% worse than single target for Spellslinger, at least. We never sim Frostfire no GS because the mastery from Frostfire is just insane. But yeah. And then when you look at AoE, our AoE situation didn't really improve. It was primarily Frostfires that improved. Frostfire was simming about like 14 mil, so gained a mil. And then Arcane lost some, which is good. But yeah, as you can see, no GS does sim better in AoE just because we don't really like casting Glacial Spike in AoE that much. It's just, you gain 2.5% AoE to lose 6% single target, and most of the time that's not worth it. But it's an option. And for Spellslinger, no Death Chill is also pretty reasonable to not take. No Glacial Spike does take Death Chill, of course. For Frostfire, DC is a much greater loss to not take. You can see it's about 5.5 to 6% worse. So yeah, if you're playing Frostfire, you kind of have to play DC. If you're playing Spellslinger, you're kind of good to not do that. Obviously, Spellslinger is just a little bit stronger than Frostfire still in AoE, like 4% or so. And that's fine. Frostfire has more burst, and again, Spellslinger is kind of more loss in the game and whatnot. So yeah, and Spellslinger does scale better into higher target counts for numerous reasons, right? So not bad. I mean, this is okay. If you look at like Arcane, now this I would take with a huge grain of salt because it's definitely going to necessitate some changes to the APL. So I would say Arcane probably going to end up with at least 100, if not 200. Well, maybe a million more DPS. Sorry, it's a large jump, but I would say this is definitely not where Arcane is going to end up lying. As it should be 5 target. So yeah, I would assume it's gonna end up being like 18 or 19 million when it all settles, because I think I already saw Sun Fury jump up 500,000. So yeah, I'm feeling much more optimistic about the spec tuning currently. I would prefer if splinters weren't randomly hitting immune ads, because that kind of sucks for Spellslinger. I would prefer if they kind of figure out something, if they just like made the Pyroblast from the 4-set, maybe like always Shatter or something, just so it's either that or they make it on hit, and even if they make it on hit, it's still not very good in 2-target. And I know it's like kind of, whoa, oh my god, but it's on Splitting Ice. It doesn't matter if you can't shatter it, it's essentially worthless, and we can barely shatter Glacial Spike in 2-target, and that does not work for Pyroblast the way that we do that. So yeah, a bit disappointing, just from the fact that we kind of still suck in 2-target, but whatever. Anyway, definitely a lot more optimistic about us going into next year. I wouldn't say like rush to your Frost Mage or anything, but I also don't think that's something you ever really want. Because normally when that's the case, Frost has to be simming like absurdly higher than the other specs usually, because there's less of a reason for you to want to play it, and then it tends to get nerfed. So I think I would hope that we kind of keep this relative level of balance, except with them probably buffing Frostfire Fire, because yikes. I think Arcane's going to get some APL changes and just shoot up again. And I don't think Frost is still going to be a play in Raid, which is okay. I think it's at a point where it can very reasonably be a viable alternative, I hope. And then, 2 weeks in the tier, they're going to buff us because we're going to be at the bottom of Warcraft logs. And I am A-okay with that, because it's really the average that's going to drag it down rather than the top end. So yeah, I know people really like strong tier sets, so it's probably disappointing to see. Um, yeah, I mean personally, it's kind of okay. This doesn't really change much of the gameplay for Frost. Definitely a huge change to the gameplay for Arcane. But you no longer have to like be tracking your Splinter Storm, so you don't try and overcap Harmony. It would be great if Arcane's 4-piece was after gaining 20 Harmony stacks, you get Intuition, rather than when you get 20 Harmony stacks, you get Intuition. The difference being you have to wait until you get 20 Harmony stacks to get the Intuition, versus if I get 10, consume it, get 10, I then get to Intuition. The second one's a lot better because, Arcane Harmony caps at 20, so it's very likely you're going to overcap just trying to get to your Intuition. And also, it heavily like reduces your barrage timers. And so, one of the things Porum's going to look at is he needs to look again at barrage conditionals, because you're not getting enough intuitions to saturate every single time you want it to barrage anymore. So there might be a gain to be had for going back to the whole, checking to see if your tempo is about to fall off and whatnot. This is, yeah, Sun Fury tier set seems a little bit sad now, especially for Fire. That's just a little weak. But I think if they can play Fire and they can slam some Ignite on a boss, I think they'll stop complaining. But personally, I think Sun Fury Fire is very boring when you play UI, and it just shows that one, Fire probably needs a Pyroclasm Kindling choice node back, and two, if they ever moved Glacial Spike for a long period of time, it would be really boring. Because if you try playing Sun Fury Fire, you're pressing the same 2 buttons, 3 buttons for 4 minutes. It's not very interesting. So, yeah. All right. Let me know your thoughts. I assume this is probably not going to be the last tuning we see, but I hope they manage to keep kind of this spirit together. And I would hope that of the changes they're going to make, they like buff Arcane or Frozen Orbs AoE radius. And maybe like a tiny buff to Comet Storm would be solid, because currently Spellslinger doesn't want to cast it in single target, and Frostfire could just use a little bit of a bump in AoE still, though. If you just buff Comet Storm, it's gonna buff both of them, but whatever. Yeah. W.